Ho 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 boys, the first of the frost. Shillelagh season has begun. Did you know Ireland has over 400,000 miles of hedgerows? A two-dimensional rainforest cast like a web across the land. All sorts of plants and animals seek refuge from the green desert amongst the shrubbery. On and in native species such as willow, holly, hazel and rowan, to name just a few. But today, I have my heart set on the dark mother of the woods. Identifiable by its white star-shaped flowers that blossom in early spring, its serrated and wrinkled oval-shaped leaves, and notably its dark and thorny branches. I am of course in search of a noble blackthorn tree, prized from time immemorial for its protection against otherworldly beings, its timber adored for its strength and flexibility. Now that winter is here and the sap has fallen from their thorny branches, a precarious stick-maker like myself can test his luck at finding and then stealing a suitable branch, all in hopes of crafting the legendary walking stick turned weapon. Join me as we explore the rich history, the detailed and satisfying making process of Ireland's most revered stick, the shillelagh. Making a shillelagh is a fairly simple process. The piece I struggle with most is the patience. Although we cut our branch in winter, when the sap has fallen from the trunk and branches down into the roots, there's still a lot of moisture trapped within our stick here. Time seems to be the only real solution for this problem. A general rule of thumb for drying out timber is to allow 1 year of drying per inch of thickness. This rule is usually applied when we're working with planks or slabs. Most shillelaghs are between 1 and 1.5 inches in thickness, so we can assume 1 year is a sufficient amount of time for our stick to season. Some stick makers like to wait a little bit longer. I've heard of people waiting 3, even 5 years before they'll even work on their sticks. I was in a mad rush to get this stick made, only giving it 11.5 months to dry. Look, stick making isn't an exact science. She can dry what she's swinging. Now the only reason we dry at all is because wet wood can be very temperamental. It can often bend, warp and crack in ways you wouldn't expect it to. And with most of the moisture gone, that's not going to be a problem for us anymore. Now the stick making process up until this point is just glorified hedge trimming. The real stick making process begins, as far as I'm concerned, once you get it up onto the workbench. This is where we get to crack out our toys, our little pruning saws and our rasps, both big and small, in order to trim, though not entirely remove, the twigs and the thorns we find up along the branch. If you want a stick that's smooth as silk and as straight as an arrow, go ask a machine. It's all these bumps and knuckles that give our shillelagh its character, so we have to be careful not to be too aggressive with our tools. A rasp and some sandpaper are more or less the only tools you need to make a shillelagh, but I picked up this fine little rasp at a car boot sale one morning, and I find it's very handy just for trimming down and rounding over the small little thorns and bumps. For the big bad bends, we gotta bring the heat. I threw together this steam box using some old windowsills, some bin liners and a wallpaper stripper. We pumped this triangular prism full of steam and then shove in our shillelagh. This is where some mad science starts to take place. The heat and moisture from the steam soften the lignin in the wood. Lignin is like a natural polymer or adhesive within the wood that holds all the fibres together. So now that our lignin has been softened, we can now bend, or in this case straighten, our timber without it breaking on us. Rule of thumb while steaming timber is to allow 1 hour of steaming per every inch of thickness. If you don't have a steam box and your piece of wood isn't perfectly straight, using a blow dryer or a heat gun on a localized bend within your stick will also work, or even just delicately holding it over a flame or some other source of heat. Heat is hot, so do be careful with those hands of yours. Notice here now I'm using gloves to employ this technique that I like to call vice and prize. I didn't do this for too long because I found I was damaging the bark, which didn't really matter because I was going to paint over it anyway, but I said I'd play on the safe side and use this technique. I don't have a name for it that almost rhymes yet, but I'm more or less using my leg, my eyeballs and this straight edge to straighten out our shillelagh here. I wanted to leave a little bit of a curve at the top where the shaft meets the knob just because I think it looks good. But once we have our stick straight enough, it's time to cut it to length. When you're out foraging for your stick, you should look for something in excess of 36 inches. This will give you some wiggle room when it comes to this stage of your stick making. We landed our exact length later. For now, we're just going to remove this bit at the end and work on our knob. This is the part at the top of the stick, if you will. It's usually made up of, as in this case, the mother branch of our shillelagh here. Other times the root ball and the main trunk of a blackthorn shrub is used. The wood from the root was more desired as it was less likely to crack or break during use. The knob is designed to fit comfortably into the user's hand, but it does have a more menacing use, and that use is fighting. Batteract is the traditional art of Irish stick fighting. The term comes from the Irish word batta, which means stick or cudgel. Batteract has roots in ancient Irish culture, where sticks were used as tools, weapons, and symbols of authority. It became especially prominent during the 18th and 19th century when it became associated with faction fighting. These were organised skirmishes between two rival groups or gangs. These events, whilst often incredibly violent, also served as kind of a form of local entertainment, expression of identity, and also as a means of settling disputes. The practice declined with the loss of the Irish language and traditional Irish customs during British colonisation and the Great Famine. Although Batteract became stigmatised as a relic of rural rowdiness, in recent years it's experiencing a revival as part of a broader interest in traditional Irish culture and martial arts. Modern practitioners are currently working to preserve and reconstruct its techniques from historical sources and oral tradition. For me, the shillelagh encapsulates the Irish spirit. Under the penal laws, most Irish people weren't allowed to hold weapons such as swords or axes. So what did we do? Only head out to the hedgerows, find the densest sticks we could find, fill the knobs up with lead and use those instead. This old thing? A weapon? Nah, this is a walking stick. So back to our making. After a hardcore rasping session, we have a nice round knob here, and now I'm just using my knife just to remove all them aggressive rasp marks. The sharp edge slices through those fibres, giving us a nice smooth finish, and we can also use it almost like a scraper just to tackle these parts that have unusual grain flowing in all sorts of directions. Now I do actually want to use this shillelagh as a walking stick, and to do that I need to find the right height. If your elbow is dead straight when the end of your stick is touching the floor, it means your stick is too short. On the other hand, if your elbow is too bent when the end of the stick is touching the floor, it means your stick is too long. So it's just about finding a balance somewhere in between. Once we have found our length, one of the more tricky little jobs in stick making is upon us, and that is fitting the ferrule. You can buy specific stick making brass ferrules for the end of your stick, but I find repurposing a piece of old copper pipe to be a good alternative. First, I sever the fibres using the knife here. We can use the knife and also the draw knife to just pare away the excess wood. So I had an idea to scuff up the other end of my copper pipe with a file and then use it almost like a circular hole saw just to kind of shape the end of my stick to fit the ferrule. I only went down about half the length of my ferrule, then I removed it and used my little back saw here just to cut a slit down as far as I went with the copper pipe. I've had issues in the past whereby the ferrule has come loose with use, so these are just a number of the precautions I take to ensure that doesn't happen. The next one I'm using is this technique here where we use our gas torch just to heat up the copper so that it expands, then rapidly cooling said copper with some water. This causes the metal to shrink back down again, locking around the wood, giving us a nice tight grip. A bit of hacksawing, a bit of wedging, and our shillelagh is coming along nicely. In folklore, the shillelagh was a lot more than just a weapon. It symbolised strength, wit and humour, reflecting the Irish ethos of overcoming adversity with cleverness and courage. In other legends, a shillelagh could carry blessings or curses. Carving a shillelagh used to be a skill imbued with reverence, and the process often included rituals to bind its power. Examples I could find was using specific butter to finish the shillelagh and allowing the shillelagh to season within the chimney of a house for many years. A well-made shillelagh might be passed down through generations, bringing protection or fortune to its bearer. As well, of course, you've got the connection to the blackthorn tree. The blackthorn tree itself is steeped in folklore. Associated with fairies and otherworldly beings, blackthorn wood was believed to possess protective and magical properties. Wielding a blackthorn shillelagh might thus have been seen as invoking a link to these mystical powers. So we're nearing the finish line here. I'm sanding up to 120 grit. I don't find the need to go any higher as I'm going to be covering this with a varnish later anyway, and that'll have a natural shine. So I've given my knife a good sharpen because the next part of the making process is cutting a little notch into the face of our stick here. This here is a branding iron that was made for me by my friend James O'Connor. He's a traditional blacksmith and he made this for me entirely by hand on what bits of free time we had during our summer residency together in Bunratty Castle and Folk Park. It's a tool I'll always treasure and a lovely way for me to personalise the things I make. Oftentimes when I wear woolen jumpers or a peaked cap or brandish a shillelagh, I'm accused of paddywhackery. This is a term used to describe acting in a way that kind of exaggerates and stereotypes Irish culture. I suppose time has moved on, style and fashion have changed, most people don't really wear wool or caps anymore, and there certainly aren't too many 23-year-olds shuffling around the place with walking sticks. For me, walking around the place with a shillelagh isn't about amusing American tourists or some sort of weird, self-deprecating Irish humour. It's about the craftsmanship, the history and the spirit this stick embodies. It's about keeping those traditions alive, or at the very least in the conversation. It's a tangible connection to a rich cultural legacy, a reminder of Ireland's struggle for identity and the ingenuity of its people in preserving their traditions. At the best of times, it's a great conversation starter, especially with people like-minded and with similar interests. You don't need me to tell you to be unapologetically who you are. If you want to go walking around the place with a stick, who cares what anyone else thinks? If they've got a problem with it, well, you've got a stick. Anyway, I better tell you how to finish this stick before I finish this video. After I had it gently sanded, I cleaned it with some sugar soap. This stuff looks absolutely delicious, but don't drink it. Dilute it, about 80% with water, and then use it to clean off your stick before we go painting it. Put a bit of masking tape over all the parts I didn't want paint on, and some people might not want any paint on any of their stick, that's alright too. But seeing as I had damaged a bit of the bark with my vice action earlier, I said best thing would be to give it one coat of black paint, and I didn't regret that. What I did regret was using yacht varnish. Although it gave the stick a nice shine and obviously great for protection, for some reason I always find yacht varnish very kind of plasticky looking. Don't get me wrong, I think it looks great, but if I could do it all again, I would have used Danish oil. I think it leaves kind of a more natural finish on wood. As we've explored in this video, the shillelagh is far more than just a stick. It's a symbol of Irish resilience, identity and storytelling. From its roots as a practical tool of self-defence to its transformation into a cultural icon, the shillelagh carries the weight of history, the spark of folklore and the charm of Irish wit. Whether it's wielded as a weapon of honour, imbued with mystical powers, or simply celebrated as a humorous emblem, the shillelagh has left an indelible mark on Irish tradition and beyond. So next time you see a shillelagh, be it hanging up on some pub wall somewhere or tapping its way along the street, or maybe even if you decide to go on ahead and make one for yourself, spare a thought for its legacy, a legacy of strength, ingenuity and connection to a culture that continues to inspire and entertain. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. Slán go fóill.